welcome back to my channel. My name is Ella, and for today I have something a little bit different. We're doing a review of the Nosferatu movie that just came out. Though if you want to hear my slightly, like hot takes about this movie and why I'm only giving this movie 6 out of 10, wait until the end of this video. Now obviously I'm gonna have to put out a disclaimer, there's gonna be spoilers in this. If you haven't seen Nosferatu, I'm gonna quickly jumpstart into how scary this is because I got a couple of those questions over on my Instagram, and then I'm gonna head right into the spoilers. So, how scary is Nosferatu? Personally, I didn't find it really scary at all. Out of 10, I'd give it like a 3. There was 1 or 2 scenes that were a little bit more on the gore side. In case you are really sensitive to this and you haven't seen it yet and you're gonna go to the cinema, if you see a man holding a pigeon, just look away. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, to be honest, I'm probably pretty desensitized from anything like this. I think scariness wasn't really bad at all. I think there was, and I don't really think any of his movies are necessarily scary. There is an underlying sexual theme and some people are really uncomfortable with that. There also is necrophilia involved in this movie. You don't see it, at least not this version. I'm not sure about the extended cut, obviously, it's not out yet. And so this is a witches and occultists review of Nosferatu. So let's have a look. We have the opening scene. Now her opening scene is essentially her summoning Nosferatu and having like almost like a backflash of what is happening, like setting the stage. She is clearly, Ellen is our character here, is clearly both in a passionate sexual state, but then also towards the end in like a scared state. And then we open up with Ellen waking up from probably a memory, a dream, where she had that memory, which is interesting because I feel like this was actually much more of a prophecy than the entire like rest of all of the different prophecies that are like actually explained as a prophecy. Her having this dream, to me, was basically because what, in my opinion, and I've seen other people kind of comment on this too a little bit online, is the case is that Ellen is suffering from melancholia or depression, and that is the lure of death, and Nosferatu is literally death, and we do see that later on as well. I'll get into it. But in this case, her remembering that almost feels like it's being like brought up again. That melancholia that you thought you were like over is coming back. And then she obviously has the dream that she tells Thomas, where she has that really strong reaction with the lilacs because they were in her dream, and it kind of was starting and kickstarting that entire like prophecy that she was having within that dream. To me, it gave it all away. That's the one thing, and I will say I did give this movie like a 6 out of 10 because there were a couple of things that I thought were too predictable. They were too on the nose, and I don't want to sound like a snob or anything, like I don't want to come off that way. I do think that, and I guess it makes sense in my mind, the extended cut is going to be, I think, probably, or I hope so, much more in-depth, whereas it's kind of like a Lord of the Rings type of thing with the extended version. I feel like this one was definitely made for the general public to, be a little bit more palpable for the general public. But yeah, her dream, in my opinion, gave everything away. Her saying, oh, I am marrying death, there's like all of these, like the stench of all these dead people around us and everything. To me, I was like, oh, okay, ending explained, I see the ending. I know what's happening. So her ending was, to me, not a surprise. I wasn't shocked by it. I was like, yeah, we knew this from the start. She literally told us. But it is interesting because obviously we have to consider, okay, this is the 1830s, she's a woman, she probably does have this melancholia, this depression, which Thomas does obviously speak about and on as well, like, oh, you shouldn't be saying these things, you shouldn't be saying them out loud, like, let's just like not speak about these things from your past anymore, they're in the past, it's like untreated depression and hysteria, which obviously goes to your womb, or it's in relation to your womb. Hysterics was, like the wandering womb, and then you've got that entire sequence with her later on, like tightening the corset, wearing it during sleep, and it all just gets worse because that's not how you treat depression. And also the application of the opioids or the twilight sleep. The twilight sleep is from the early 20th century, but we do see her having, you know, these opioids obviously to like put her down, essentially, to like make her not have these like screaming seizures anymore, because they were uncomfortable. Dealing with that was uncomfortable. But also we've then got so much Jungian themes here as well, right? With the shadow self. Ella and Nosferatu's relationship is very Jungian. It's like, is he actually like an actual being? I mean, in this movie, yes, but he is obviously, and we see that throughout the movie, he's a representation of her shadow, of her desires, of her sexual desires, but also of that like melancholia again. We also see that with her then obviously asking our professor later on, our alchemist over there, does evil come from beyond or from within? So we got a lot of Jungian themes, and there's a lot of like that philosophy slash psychology involved, which I believe Robert Eggers' wife is a psychologist, so makes sense. However, obviously Nosferatu also symbolizes like carnal lust. He's a vampire or slash succubus. He is a really great representation, and vampires oftentimes represent that, those carnal lusts, you know, the desire for sex, money, addiction, you know, like it's all of these kind of things. Sometimes they're a little bit more on the taboo end that Nosferatu is representative of. I did find it really interesting, the relationship with Thomas as well, how he just doesn't believe Ellen. It's a little bit of a Cassandra going on here, where, you know, she has these visions and no one believes her throughout the entire thing, right? No one seems to really take her that seriously, except our professor. And they're the ones that obviously ultimately hatched the like self-sacrificing plan. Now, about the movie itself, we have that really long journey sequence, really long, really dragged out. We get to the part where he finally arrives at a tavern in Romania. That sequence, by the way, I'm not sure if there was, I must have missed the symbolism, if there was any symbolism to do with the Romani travelers. I missed it. I can't tell you why that scene was there. Personally, I thought it was a little bit pointless to have that scene there. It was visually interesting, but I think it dragged out. And that's the thing, a lot of times this movie had a really weird time like allocation, like how much traveling sequences we got. And then the end especially felt very cramped. But we have that long sequence in Romania with the travelers, and then obviously Thomas has that dream, and then, you know, he's got that dirt on his boots, so it's kind of like, was it really a dream? Which I really loved. I really liked that, because essentially what was going on here was we see the virgin woman sitting on a white Mustang, and the town folks are looking for the local vampire in the cemetery, and by having that with the virgin and the horse, that is an actual bit of folklore where that's, you know, how they would seek out vampires. And, you know, the vampire was discovered where the horse would not trot or would not like pass upon, and then they open up the coffin, and, you know, there's like blood coming out of the mouth of these vampires. This is like a historical like little bit of folklore, and then you would dagger that vampire or put a dagger through or like a sword through to kill that vampire. So I did really appreciate that, and Robert Eggers does an amazing job at all of these folklore type movies, including a lot of folklore. A lot of research goes into it in that case. Also, we have the entire crossroads sequence, which that is beautiful. Like, yes, it's a dragged out kind of travel part sequence, but that one was gorgeous, and I felt quite symbolic as well, considering crossroads are like neither here nor there. They're very liminal. They are a big part of occultism as well. It's where he's supposed to make a decision. Are you gonna enter that coach? Are you gonna take that final step? Even though you have just learned about all of these things about the vampire, you know, with your boots clearly being dirty, the dream and everything, the townsfolk telling you do not go to this castle, do not seek out Count Orlok, and he still chooses to go for the money, which is another part of that carnal lust that we've seen throughout this movie as well. Really, Thomas represents that quite a lot. You know, his entire like incentive to be going on this journey is the money. He doesn't listen to Ellen. He is like, no, I need to go for the money. And we see that at the crossroads as well. He has, you know, that final decision, and he goes into that very mysterious looking carriage and makes that choice to, you know, is on the crossroads and makes that choice forward. Just really, really, you know, following his fate essentially, following that prophecy. Now, what was super cool, and I'm potentially mispronouncing how you pronounce this word, Count Orlok does not speak Latin, he speaks Dacian, which is a real ancient culture. The language is, as far as I understand, is a dead language. They kind of like tried to, in the movie, you know, like how it would have potentially sounded. It did, there were moments when I thought it's Latin and I thought I understood words, but the Dacians also were pre-Christian pagans, and so there's a lot of like folklore going in with that too. I'm not gonna make an entire video about that, just Google that, that's really cool. And so when Thomas arrives at that castle and he meets Count Orlok and he's signing that contract with a weird scripture, which I'm assuming, I'm not really sure if that was fictive or if that was supposed to be Dacian or not. He does kind of like mention like that it's, you know, this ancient language, so it could be, I'm not really sure. But once again, we have two things that are really stood out here. Well, three things, I suppose. The first one that really stood out to me was the hair that Ellen gave Thomas for his journey. It's a tag lock, and Count Orlok takes that tag lock. He doesn't give it back. That I thought was really interesting. Is it supposed to symbolize that Thomas gave her away, gave a piece of her away? Is it supposed to literally, really literally be, it's a tag lock that is, you know, connecting Count Orlok or Nosferatu to Ellen, and that's how kind of things move into the sequence of Nosferatu like looking for Ellen. There's a lot of interpretations you can obviously do with that, but he also then signs this contract that he doesn't even understand. And this is what is interesting. He sees the money and then he signs. And once again, we see that Thomas's driving force in this movie a lot of times is the money, is that lust for money, or to satiate, you know, his like self-awareness around having less money than his friends, for example, and just, you know, wanting to have that money for him and Ellen. Now then obviously we have, and that's another little bit that I find really a little bit could have potentially be either shortened or added more depth into, if you wanted to be that dragged out, is Thomas trying to escape this castle. And then obviously comes upon Count Orlok in his sarcophagus, opens it up and everything, and then he like jumps out and like washes ashore, gets saved by some nuns, which I find also very interesting that he gets saved by these nuns, which actually ultimately ends up being why potentially he was saved in general and didn't end up dying from his wounds. There's a lot to be said there too, with the kind of Christian lens going on here a little bit. Also, again, or not again, I don't think I've mentioned this before yet, Count Orlok / Nosferatu is kind of a little bit of like an antichrist figure as well. So he kind of is everything depraved, right? He's got all those taboos going about him. The carnal lust, the sexual lust, you know, like the death, right? Also, this movie plays during Christmas time, which in Christianity is the birth of Christ. So you could make a really good argument for Nosferatu being like the Antichrist. And so therefore the nuns kind of saving Thomas from Nosferatu was definitely, there was a lot of symbolism there going on too. I did really like the superstitions added in and the like general folklore throughout the movie with, for example, oh, you're not supposed to travel, you're sick, that's bad luck, which it was. So I thought that was a really nice little like, I just in general like the Easter eggs were, I really liked the Easter eggs. Another Easter egg that I really liked was the name drop of like Agrippa, Solomon's seal, like there were a couple of occult name drops and like Easter eggs that I thought were really nice for me to like notice. I feel like once again Robert Eggers definitely did like some research there. Now another thing that I felt was a little bit dragged out personally was the seizures of Ellen. I will say it is interesting because I've seen people kind of like complain a little bit about how her seizures are very orgasmic in nature and how weird that is, and that's like, yes, that is on purpose, because she is literally like, Nosferatu is, there is that weird sexual, like it's almost like a succubus. And succubus, in case you are not aware, is essentially there's incubus and succubus. They're kind of this vampiric spirit that were believed to have intercourse with you or your spirit at night, leaving you a little bit drained as well. Very vampiric, And that is obviously the relationship that Ellen has with Nosferatu since the beginning, since, you know, like when she obviously must have at some point summoned him in the past. She's got, it's both that lure of death or also like sexual desires, like depraved sexual desires. They're not probably actually depraved, but because of the time being 1830, a woman having any sort of sexual desire is taboo and depraved. So obviously that's going to be like how it's going to look, how it's going to manifest. I did think there were points in that sequence or of us seeing all of these seizures where I think we could have like shortened that a little bit. I did think that the discussion about like, you know, like making sure her corset is tight at night was interesting. Like that's a historical thing that was actually happening, so I appreciated that. But I do think that there was a lot of things that the movie could have expanded on, and then there were certain things where I'm like, this is a little bit unnecessary, and I feel like that was very dragged out. Now then obviously we actually go into the entire like latter half of the movie, and that's a speed run, right? Like we're kind of just like going through it to a point where the days we're not even sure like, wait, how do we like go through these days so quickly, especially with the 3-day mark where Nosferatu is basically telling Ellen, look, he's now come to that village or town and he is going to kill everyone if she doesn't disavow Thomas and become his bride instead and give herself to him, and she has to like willingly call him in. And obviously then she does. Spoiler alert, she does give herself to Nosferatu. In that entire sequence we have some interesting things happening as well. Once again, carnal lust being like a big one. We see, is his name Francis? I think his name was Francis with Anna. He cannot resist her. We know that from the beginning when he talks about that she's pregnant again, he just can't resist her. And that's where we have our necrophilia sequence. We don't see it on screen. I'm not sure if the extended cut is going to show it. I really hope not. That's where I personally would definitely draw the line. But he is completely distraught. His children just were killed, his wife just got killed, and he has that immense grief, and then he succumbs to that awful lust, desire, and has a necrophilia moment over there with his dead wife. He also then dies and, you know, is like set on fire and everything. The rats are everywhere, death is everywhere, there's a whole panic, you know, there's so much panic, there's so much chaos. Very Plague, of course, very accurate in that regard. And then of course Ellen finally with the professor says, okay, I need to, like, I'm the one that is able to stop Nosferatu. She calls Nosferatu to herself. She, you know, consummates that unholy marriage, her wedding to death. You know, she finally gives in to that lust to death, but she also takes him down with her. And then obviously Thomas is there at that last scene, and the lilacs are there once again as we had it in the first. You know, we have like a full circle moment, beautiful cinematography, probably the most beautiful visual in a movie in a long time. In general, this movie was visually gorgeous, absolutely a beauty to visually see. And yeah, so a couple of, like, you know, to summarize some themes here we've got going on. We've got carnal lust, we've got death's lure, we've got the succubus, the sleep paralysis seizure kind of situation, the necromancy with Ellen being called both related to Isis, a priestess of Isis I think it was, and also being a witch and necromantic in nature. Also Count Orlok, I keep saying Count Orlok, Nosferatu saying this is just your nature, this is who you are, this is just, you know, like, I'm just your representation essentially. I'm like a product of your like oppressed kind of feelings that are happening. Then we've got some old school symbolism within general vampires and everything. We've got again sexual oppression, also sexual diseases that during that time were obviously really plentiful, that vampires also came to represent. Then things that I really liked in general, I really loved the folklore research, I loved the inclusion of the different superstitions, the final shots were a work of art, or was a work of art, and the Easter eggs of the occult themes. Also of course a really big one, that was the symbol symbol of Nosferatu himself. You know, it was like his seal and his stamp and everything. It was the 7-point star, which, mind you, I have not really done a lot of grimoire work, so I could not actually in honesty tell you what seal that actually is. I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments. But yeah, it's obviously and I wouldn't be surprised if it is like a liminal, you know, death crossing over, neither here nor there type of seal. But this is just, I'm not sure on the seal, to be honest with you. What I would have liked, however, a little bit more is if Nosferatu was a bit more of a mysterious figure that only Ellen can see the physical manifestation of. I feel like if he had been more elusive, if we had been more like, is he real, is he not real? And it was a little bit more like that he really is a symbolic, like he's really symbolic of that she is with melancholia, that she has like, you know, these sexual desires that she is not able to actually like live because they're oppressed and everything. And if only she really was able to see Nosferatu, I personally would have preferred that, where it's a little bit more of like a psychological like mind game. I like that type of thing where you know, they keep you guessing a little bit more and it's not as on the nose. That's personal, of course. That's just something that I would have liked to see. I also would have liked to see at least one, considering we got so many sequences, at least one sequence of Ellen's seizure visions, potentially how luring Nosferatu is to her, because we saw him as he was. We saw him as literally death. He was a rotting corpse. But to her, with the melancholia, was he maybe potentially like a little bit of, did he look different, you know, to her? Was he more luring to her, you know? I would have liked to see that a little bit more, potentially, where it's like, okay, you love Thomas, but clearly you are tempted to give in, and eventually she did self-sacrifice herself to give in to this Nosferatu death, you know, figure. So I would have liked to see one of her visions. They probably were very sexual in nature, considering she's, you know, kind of having like these orgasmic sort of seizures. So, but I would have liked to just like see kind of like how Nosferatu looked to her. It is kind of funny how like a lot of people at the moment are simping over Nosferatu. It's like, I get it, he's got like the stash, but like, which personally I'm not about, but like, you know, there's a lot of, and I mean, I know that that is like a lot of times, it happens a lot of times with this type of movie. But yeah, I would have liked to just see that a little bit more out of Ellen's perspective too. Overall, I feel like the depth was missing in places. It was a movie. It was a movie. I would definitely give it a 6 out of 10. I do want to really see the extended version, because I'm hoping that the extended, and I really hope I'm not going to be disappointed by the extended version. I'm hoping that the extended version just has more depth, has more background story, has more on like questions that I'm having. Like, for example, how did Nosferatu reach Ellen? Like, if Ellen was summoning a spirit, how come she reached one that's like almost 2,000 kilometers away from her? What? How? Did she have prior occult knowledge, or is she a natural witch? Same with Knock. It's really interesting. I mean, yes, okay, the 1830s, we did have a little bit of like an occult renaissance type situation. People really into the occult during that time. But again, how did he manage? Like, what? How did he do that? The same with our alchemist professor that I do not remember the name of, but I love the actor. What's with him? How does he have all of this knowledge? How did he not think about the fact that Nosferatu has a literal tag lock of Ellen, and that could potentially be a way to sever that relationship a little bit, at least to like weaken it a little bit more? Yeah, there were a couple of questions that I had. I feel like it could have been fleshed out a little bit more. I feel like at certain times the depth was missing. And to be honest with you, I kind of left the cinema a little bit like, the fuck did I just watch? Like, it didn't really get an emotion out of me, you know? And sometimes I feel like that's the case when we were not able to bond with the characters deeply enough. The one and only time that I felt an emotional connection was when Francis had his hands on like the sarcophaguses of his 2 daughters, and he started crying and everything. That really quickly turned into, oh no, don't do it, don't do it. But that was the only time that I had like a feeling of like sadness, you know? But yeah, I don't know. I feel like we didn't really get a close enough connection to some of these characters. Like, I personally never got really emotionally invested in them, which I find is a bit of a shame. And yeah, so I feel like sometimes the meat was missing, the depth was missing. It was a little bit surface for me, a little bit predictable at times, and a little bit on the nose at times. So that's kind of why I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Now, with all that being said, let me know your thoughts. Also, obviously, I know there's going to be so many things that I've missed in here. There's so much symbols I definitely missed. I know that, I'm aware of that. This is not a dissertation or a thesis. This is just a silly old YouTube video, just for fun. But yeah, do let me know what you thought of the movie, what the themes were that you really liked, or what, did you really want to see anything else as well. I really just, yeah, that conversation is so, I love it. It's like my entire threads is just like that at the moment. But yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, subscribe, and of course, share it, comment, do all the good stuff. If you would like to support this channel, I do have a Patreon with a tier as low as $1 for support, with extra content, like my rambles and stuff like that. If you want even more of this ramble, I also have a witchy shop that you're more than welcome to check out, and of course my social media. Everything is linked in the description box, so definitely go check that out. A couple of affiliate codes, just like the description box is like a little bit of a, just go check it out. But I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. May you walk with your gods. Bye.